God our Creator, and from Christ our Redeemer, who points us in the direction of mercy and reconciliation. Amen. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there is nothing unusual about this story. Everyone in this story acts as I would expect them to act in a relatively normal family. If there is such a thing as a relatively normal family. Wayward child feels guilty and comes back home. Parent welcomes child back. Sibling is resentful. End of story. But this story was written 2,000 years ago, and in the first century, the forgiving behavior of the parent would have been utterly shocking. The behavior of the eldest child would have severed the relationship in that family. The Jesus of Luke clearly wanted to convey a radically alternative understanding of a merciful God for his first audience. That we are less shocked may be due to a culture, at least for some of us, that is more aligned with Jesus' vision of God's grace. Both of my parents were expected to go to college. It was not even up for consideration. Each of them had one parent who went to college. My maternal grandfather and my paternal grandmother went to college, St. Olaf and Concordia. Thankfully, my parents chose the same college, neither one of those two colleges. Otherwise, I would not be a person. College educated did not mean equality, however. My grandma was a teacher in the early 1930s, and when she got pregnant, she had to quit. My mom went to college in the 50s, but the cultural expectation then was that finding a husband might just take precedence over preparing for a career. Even my wife Nancy, now 3 generations down the road, whose parents did not go to college, Nancy had a mother whose hope for her eldest daughter was that she be a nun or go to secretarial school. Her brothers were encouraged to go to college, any college of their choice. And when neither of those were in the cards for Nancy, she was given the option of St. Kate's or St. Ben's. Both women's colleges, I think you know that, most of you anyway. Thankfully, she persisted, and we met in college, a college that had both boys and girls, males and females. And she had her own career and has had more of an impact on her communities than I can ever imagine. Call it a step in the right direction. We're making progress, right? More than once, as a pastor, I listened to stories told by female elders in congregations where I served of going to work right out of high school so that they could support their brothers who were away at college. Some of them would work for years to help get their younger brothers through college. And I would ask if they were resentful. And surely they were, if they were given the opportunity to share their story and reflect on the implicit sexism. There's all kinds of resentment in families. I feel bad for the older sibling in this story. She has every right to feel bitter and resentful toward her father's treatment of her wayward sibling. She has, after all, stayed close to home, doing exactly what was expected of her. And now her brother, who squandered everything, is back. And he's not taken back with conditions befitting the shame of his actions, but he is taken back with a celebration. They give him new clothes and jewelry and kill the fatted calf. It's one thing for him to come back and live in the basement. It's quite another to have the party of the century thrown in his honor. So what about the resentment? There's this great quote by Nelson Mandela, you've probably heard it. Resentment is drinking poison and hoping it kills your enemy. I agree, kind of. But I also realize how hard it is to get there. It's one thing for me to fight my own tendency toward feelings of bitterness and resentment. It's another thing for me to judge others for feeling resentful. That's a journey they have to take on their own. I have pretty much decided that the older sibling in this story has a right to be resentful. I hope she can get over it, but I don't judge her for it if she can't. I hope she can get over it. We'll see. It's not my call to make. Does the older sibling need to forgive her father for being merciful? Does the older sibling need to forgive her brother for being a irresponsible jerk and then willing to accept more mercy than he deserves? Does she need to forgive herself for being petty? I don't know. What does seem apparent is that there is a gaping hole that only the messy process of reconciliation can fill. Reconciliation is different than forgiveness. The great psychologist Lewis Smead writes, "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you." To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. Forgiveness is a good way to deal with resentment, a good way to move on. But if you want to continue in a relationship, it's only a step in the process of reconciliation. In 1993, in the early days of post-apartheid South Africa, a young woman, Amy Beale, was murdered by a mob of angry youth affiliated with the Pan-African Congress, who had been using as their motto, "One settler, one bullet." What they didn't know was that Amy, though white, was not a settler, but a Fulbright scholar at the University of Western Cape and an anti-apartheid activist, what we would call today an ally. Linda Beale, who's Amy's mother, was asked in an interview 10 years after her murder, "People say that you have forgiven Amy's killers. Do you see it that way?" And this is how Linda responded. "Forgiveness is kind of a big word. You did something to me, but I am bigger than that, and I'm going to forgive you, and I am going to walk away." I think the bigger word is reconciliation. Reconciliation takes work. Forgiveness is sometimes more for yourself. Reconciliation takes two people. Now, this is an extreme example, but it speaks to the reality that forgiveness may allow the aggrieved party to move on, but it alone is not able to restore a relationship. That only happens through the hard, challenging, messy process of reconciliation. That is the work that awaits the two siblings and their parent in this story from Luke. And the work of reconciliation, in large ways and small ways, is a work that awaits us as well, as we live in a nation that hasn't been more divided since the Civil War. As we live in relationships and in families and communities, it's always right there waiting for us. The messy work of reconciliation. The only forgiveness that happens here, and it is profound, is the parent's forgiveness of the child. And there's no hesitation. Let that be a reflection of God's love and grace. There's no hesitation because of the love that the parent has for the child. It is unconditional, and it is completely understandable what the parent does. What's harder is the work of reconciliation, which we hope and pray will bring about fulfillment, even joy, for us and for all.